So again, welcome. This is our final class of this series on Chapter 6 of Master Shantideva's text, chapter on patience. So thank you for your patience waiting for me tonight. Let's go ahead and get started with a recitation of the prayers that we've been doing. Tonight, I think we have time to recite this 3 times. Maybe it's a bit more auspicious too for this final class of this series to recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And feel as we're reciting this, we're recognizing the qualities of the Buddha, that we all have the ability to attain these same qualities, to achieve all these realizations that are mentioned in here, but also having great gratitude for the teachings of the Buddha, and everything that the Buddha accomplished that allows us to have access to this incredible Dharma through the kindness of all the great gurus who came after Shakyamuni Buddha, kept these teachings alive, including Master Shantideva that we're studying. But just feel this immense gratitude as we recite this 3 times. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then let's go forward to do the mandala offering. Again, visualize the phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful Buddha paradise, whatever that means to you. But certainly thinking of all the beautiful objects that you know of in your life, in this world, and offering all those beautiful things to the refuge field, to the Buddha, all of our gurus, so we can receive their blessings and become just like them. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then refuge in bodhicitta before the teaching. We'll do a meditation on bodhicitta shortly. But bring that to mind in the second 2 lines, and then in the first 2 lines, renew your sense of refuge, finding safe direction in the 3 jewels. We'll do this once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchil Sangye Dupar Shom. And then, as usual, we'll do a short meditation before we begin. Give ourselves a chance to come into this space with a bit more focused mind and open heart through developing bodhicitta. So the first part, we'll just focus on the breath. No doubt you already have technique that you use to focus on the breath. You can do that in silence for the first few minutes after I ring the chime, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight's teaching. So let me go ahead and get it started with ringing the bell here. So now let's turn our attention towards generating our motivation of bodhicitta. And in the prayers, we paid homage to the Buddha. And recall in last week's class how we had the idea of these two fields that Master Shantideva introduces to, not just the field of Buddhas, who are an important part of our practice, because as we thought about when we recited that praise, we are indebted to the Buddha, to all the enlightened beings, to provide us with the Dharma, to help create realizations in the Sangha. You know, the three jewels would not exist were it not for the kindness of the Buddhas. So that's one field. The other field is the field of sentient beings. And this is perhaps the most important one in the context of this chapter we've been studying. Because as Master Shantideva says, we need especially the difficult people in our lives to help us to practice patience. And eventually we have to develop the mind of bodhicitta that is intent upon helping every single sentient being. So let's think about the idea of these three groups of people that we normally, quite naturally, classify sentient beings into. The group of friends and dear ones. You can think about them in the space to either side and immediately behind you, just kind of visualizing those people who support you in your life. And then in the space directly in front of you, you can visualize the difficult people. And enemies might be a strong word, but those people who are challenging for you. These can be people directly in your life, or even people in the political scene or in the world at large that we find challenging for us in terms of their views, their actions. And then surrounding these two groups are the strangers, the countless other beings that we don't have a direct relationship with at this point. And think about how every one of these beings is identical in their fundamental desire to be happy and to not suffer. In that way, they're the same as each other. Moreover, they're the same as you. And really feel this mind that embraces the equality of all of these beings, every one of them a worthy object of our love, our compassion. And recall the kindness of these beings. With the friends, it's very easy because in this life, at least, they've been very directly and intentionally kind to us. But with the strangers, we have to think about the ways that these beings may have contributed to our welfare because we are involved in a world of interdependence. We depend upon others for our food, our clothing, the gasoline we put in our cars, the electricity that we have running into our homes. I mean, there are so many people involved in our welfare and other beings besides human beings involved. They too have shown us incredible kindness, even in this life. And then finally, the difficult people, as Master Shantideva says, we need those enemies, those challenging people. We can see their being belligerent and negative and harmful to us and those we love as actually a kindness because it gives us the opportunity to practice patience at the deepest level. So with that understanding, generate the minds of love and compassion, sincerely wishing for all of these beings to have the happiness that they seek, to be free from the suffering that they've been experiencing since beginningless time. And really feel your heart open to them because we see that we need every one of these beings for our welfare now in a temporal way, but for our ultimate welfare as well. Without these beings, you can't become a Buddha. What a gift they are giving to us. Generate those thoughts that really embrace their welfare and think moreover that you are here to accomplish it, to place these beings in happiness, to protect them from suffering. And the best way to do that, the only way in fact to do that, is by becoming a Buddha yourself. In that state, you then will have the perfect compassion and wisdom and power, skillful means, the ability to know exactly how to help every single being. And in this way, all beings will eventually become enlightened through our own enlightenment. And really hold that strong motivation, holding that in view. The day when all beings achieve enlightenment through our own enlightenment, this is possible. Okay, so as I said in the motivation, last week we were going through this part of the text where Master Shantideva spends a bit of time talking about viewing sentient beings in the most favorable light, to kind of see that they are the source of our enlightenment in the end. And of course, for this practice of patience, we absolutely need these difficult people. So we were working our way through that section. Let me get us grounded in terms of the slides. With where we were at through the outlines. I found it kind of funny. I was reading Geshe Jumpa Tekchok's commentary, his oral commentary to this text, and he was talking about how confusing the outlines can be, and how you have like this outline with 5 outlines, and then each one has like 2 or 3 outlines, and some of those have individual outlines. And anyway, I hope it hasn't been too confusing for everyone, but tonight we're going to start around verse 119. I won't be going through the previous verses tonight, I don't think, because I think we're at a place where we can just move forward. So we're in this section again that was about the anger at the obstacles to our kind of achieving merit. I think this was the section with verse 102. I think it started around page 38. Anger at obstacles to the generation of merit is unsuitable. And again, this is all within the entire thing of it's being unsuitable to be impatient at things that kind of get in the way of our welfare. This is the way that we kind of think at times we can justify our anger because it's in the way of us doing something good, and especially when it has to do with us achieving merit. Well, Master Shantideva has been telling us the best way to achieve merit is to use those negative beings who are harming you or getting in your way, being obstacles to your merit, as the source of merit by practicing patience. Because as we saw last week and in the beginning of this text, patience is the greatest austerity. So we had within that the outline of think of it as an object. Let's see, this is verse 106, page 40. Think of it as an object, actually the outline's at the bottom of 39. Think of it as an object worthy of respect. So you want to think about other sentient beings in terms of being worthy of our respect, of our gratitude. Then we had the first outline. One should be respectful since it generates qualities, that being with others who are practicing their anger towards us, we get to practice patience towards them. Just like when somebody comes into our field with who's a beggar who needs resources, we get to practice generosity. So that's kind of the idea of what we looked at there, number of other verses. And then we got into this next part, which is actually where we left off. And this is where we're going to start tonight. One should be respectful because of having faith in the Buddha. So again, we looked at the fact that they contribute to our qualities. Now we're going to do a little examination on the basis of having faith in the Buddha. There are 2 outlines within this. The first one is on page 45, where verse 119 is. And this is, one should be respectful because they view all sentient beings like an only child. And this is kind of the advice from the Buddha, is that we see sentient beings as like our dear children that we want to care for. Within this, there are 3 more outlines. The first one is on page 45 as well, establishing the main method needed for becoming enlightened. Then within that, we have 2 more outlines, identifying the main method for repaying the Buddha's kindness. So this is verse 119. And so here again, we're still talking about how we're viewing sentient beings and working with them in the context of our being patient. Furthermore, what way is there to repay those without dissimulation who are a friend and grant immeasurable benefit other than by pleasing sentient beings? So essentially what Shantideva is saying is that we have those beings who are the Buddhas that, again, due to their kindness, our good karma, we've met with them, they've given us teachings, they are without dissimulation. Dissimulation being kind of, hiding one's faults. They have no deceit. There's nothing from the side of the Buddha that is deceptive in the least. So what is the better way to repay those kind beings who are our dearest friends and grant immeasurable benefit, that field of Buddhas, other than by pleasing sentient beings? And of course, the gist of this is because that's the object of all of the Buddhas. All the Buddhas became Buddhas through their development of bodhicitta, their being focused on the welfare of others. And when they become a Buddha, they don't lose that. They still continue to enact the welfare of others. So that's the object of a Buddha's compassion and love and action. Everything is directed towards enlightening sentient beings. So if we want to please the Buddhas, we please the people that they are serving. So again, this is I think this is the reference actually to how this is being seen as like a child. It's sort of like if you wanted to please a couple who were parents, well then you might please them by taking care of their child, by doing good things for their child, because they love and care for their children so much that they'd be very pleased if you did that for them, right? You know, they would feel good that you are taking care of their children. Certainly, yeah. I mean, this is one way that we can view this is that these are like the children of the Buddhas, so all of the sentient beings who are out there who are, you know, the object of the Buddha's actions. At the bottom of page 45, Gyaltsab says, further, another reason for treating sentient beings respectfully, the Buddhas, induced by great compassion, are the immovably honest friends of all migrators and establish boundless benefit for them. And that's all that Buddhas do. That's your job description when you become a Buddha is enlighten all beings. Very simple, just a few words. And you just do everything possible to do that. And of course, you don't have to put effort into it. It's happening spontaneously because you're a wish-fulfilling jewel in a sense for all beings. Through skillful means and wisdom and compassion, you manifest in whatever form to help those beings. So apart from making sentient beings happy, Gyaltsab says, how can one repay their kindness? How can we repay the kindness of the Buddhas other than taking care of the beings that are the object of their compassion and love and concern? There is no better offering to please the Buddhas than to work for the benefit of sentient beings. So this is, really the truth, right? We even see this with our gurus, right? What's the best way to please our gurus, or to do things that will be in accord with what the guru wants? To serve sentient beings. It's good to serve the guru too. It's not to say that that isn't a powerful object. There are two fields. There's the field of those higher beings who are quite central in our spiritual development, but then there's the sentient beings who are the object of the minds of our gurus, of the minds of all the Buddhas. So again, we take care of those sentient beings. We then please the Buddhas. We then, are in line with what the Buddhas want and our gurus want. So let's go on to the next outline that's at the top of page 46 of Gyaltsab commentary. This is called Achieving That Very Action, kind of how we do that. The next outline within this, again, these have a number of outlines in this one too, and even one of these is going to have some more outlines. Being patient when harmed by sentient beings. So this is how we enact that, is by actually being patient. This is what this whole chapter has been directing us to do. Because benefiting them, the sentient beings, will repay those who give up their holy bodies and enter relentless torment, who are the Buddhas. Therefore, even if those sentient beings cause me great harm, I shall behave impeccably in all. So this is the idea of, again, this is what we come to the conclusion of having examined in that previous verse, how it is that we best repay the kindness of the Buddhas is by taking care of sentient beings. And because benefiting those sentient beings will repay that kindness to them, therefore, if they do anything that harms me, I will behave impeccably. I will practice patience. I will not harm them in return. So let's look at a very, not too long a paragraph here for Gyaltsab commentary on this, but he says on 46, benefiting sentient beings repays the kindness of the Buddhas who gave up their life for sentient beings and who would even enter the realm beyond suffering for them. They say Buddhas are willing to go, certainly even Bodhisattvas should have that mindset. This is what we're going to look at in the next chapter, chapter 7, on this enthusiastic perseverance. In the Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja, they have this verse about like kind of the willingness to go to Avicii, the hell of relentless torment, even for the sake of one sentient being. This is the type of mindset we're going to be looking at developing in the next chapter. Remember how I pointed out how joyous effort is even more difficult than patience, they say, because we have to have that willingness to go to the greatest depths of suffering, even just to save one single sentient being. The Buddhas are willing to do this already. They've developed their minds fully. There's nothing stopping a Buddha from going to these realms. But they've shown us incredible kindness, and this is our way then of repaying their kindness, is by not harming other beings. So it says, hence, even if one is harmed greatly by sentient beings, one not only does not get angry, but one should strive solely to benefit them through one's three doors with everything wholesome that establishes all happiness for them. And this is that whole idea that in turn for their harm, we will give them loving kindness and compassion. not just refrain from being angry and upset and harming them back. Let's actually even go further and do something wonderful for them. At least make prayers for them, do what we can to benefit them. But we should be always holding them with loving kindness and compassion. And we have verse 121, which is in the next outline within these 3 sections of this achieving that very action. This second outline is called abandoning, regarding sentient beings with harm. So we're getting a lot of verses that are not quite repetitive, but they're kind of working with this same theme of kind of the rationale for us practicing patience in the light of repaying the kindness of the Buddhas and holding those beings that they hold dear, dear. So verse 121, because those who are my lords, those who, are kind of our saviors, the beings who are in that prominent position for us, the Buddhas, for the time being, disregard even their own bodies, then why does the confused I act proud and not behave with the attributes of a servant towards them? So this is the idea that, again, Buddhas, even again Bodhisattvas, they say that a Bodhisattva at this level of where they develop the perfection of patience to a surpassing degree, they will disregard any harm to their bodies. Somebody can be sort of, sawing away at their arm very slowly, and they will have even more compassion for them rather than any anger towards them on the basis of that harm. So the idea here is if this is so for the Buddhas and those great beings who developed their minds, why does this confused I get full of itself and not feel like we should be a servant to these beings who are our lords, who are those that we follow, who are those that we put in that supreme position? It makes more sense for us to comply with them and to do what they are wanting us to do. All the Buddhas want nothing but for us to abide by the Dharma and to achieve the results that will come from that, which are our own happiness and our own freedom from suffering, as well as our ability to contribute to that up for others as well. But it's really, we're the winners in the whole situation if we abide by that. And instead, this confused I just doesn't see clearly and continues doing what it's been doing. So this is commented on the middle of page 46. Gyaltsab Je says, further, one should not be ignorant and generate arrogant pride or be competitive in any action with the sentient beings for whose purpose the very Buddhas, that are one's lords, work without concern for their own bodies. One should abandon pride and be respectful. So again, just reiterating this point that these beings are actually very precious, and we should be abiding by what the Buddhas want for us, what our gurus want for us. They want nothing more than for us to practice this path and achieve these realizations and become enlightened, because that's their only, impetus for everything that they do. So there's a little comment in the chat box. Maybe I'll come to that now rather than waiting. It says, I've heard that when you are an Arya Bodhisattva, you do not feel pain in the same way. So even if as an Arya Bodhisattva, you go to the Naraks, the hell realms, will we as Arya Bodhisattvas, whenever we reach that state, won't suffer there, or will we? This is due to the verse 120, that we just went through. It's my understanding too that, again, there's not really that same level of pain, but when you become an Arya, what happens is, of course, you've realized emptiness directly at that point. You're not clinging any longer to the strong sense of I. You haven't removed your ignorance completely yet. That happens further down the road. Remember, there are the 5 paths, the path of accumulation, which we talked about last week, where you could still lose your bodhicitta at the beginning of that. You enter into the path of preparation. And by the way, you enter into the path of accumulation through spontaneous bodhicitta, this uncontrived mind of enlightenment. Then you enter into the path of preparation. If you hadn't traverse the Hinayana path before, you enter into path of preparation by developing the mind of calm abiding and special insight, this union that is realizing emptiness in a conceptual way, not yet directly. Then at the end of this path, you've developed your meditation so strong and your mind has gotten so subtle that you enter into the path of seeing, which is your initial direct realization of emptiness. That begins the process of removing these afflictive obscurations, the things that keep you from being free from all of your delusions and ignorance and so on. And all the karma that is together with all of that is no longer kind of active in that way. So at the point when you enter into the path of seeing and have your initial direct realization, you become an Arya, but you're not yet a being who is free of that ignorance. That happens on the path of meditation, when you go from the 7th bhumi or 7th ground to the 8th ground. There are 10 grounds that begin with the path of seeing and conclude at the end of the path of meditation. The last 3 grounds are pure grounds because you've removed all of your afflictions. But what you haven't removed are the obscurations to omniscience, which again are these subtle imprints that cause phenomena to appear to exist inherently. So when you develop your first direct realization of emptiness on the path of seeing, you come out of that meditation and you have no belief in this false appearance. Everything appears to exist inherently, but you know from your experience that there is no inherent existence. So there's no I that we're grasping at as an inherently existent I to experience all of these things and to be kind of angry in the face of that. Now, it's not to say that you're going to be completely free of your anger at that point, and there may still be places where you might have some failing of that. But nonetheless, you're pretty much at a state where you're not convinced in the reality of this I at that level. The I still exists, obviously, but it exists in such a subtle level that I have heard this comment that there's really not the same experience of pain. But even if there is the feeling of pain, there's no strong identification of the I that is reacting to that pain. And in fact, I would say probably bodhisattvas still do have pain because they haven't removed everything that would cause them to be free completely from their suffering. So they will still have experiences of suffering, but their mindset will be totally different. As I said, when you get to the 3rd ground is where you practice the perfection of patience and you bring it to its culmination. Upon entering the 3rd ground, I believe you already have obtained that, what's called a surpassing perfection of patience. And as I said, they say at that point, you can have somebody who's just like, doing, it sounds gross, sounds like a horror movie or something, somebody sawing away at your arm in a very, maybe with a rusty saw and very slowly, so you'd be experiencing all this excruciating pain, but all you have is more and more compassion for them. So again, this is a pretty high realization already. Whether they are truly experiencing pain or not, I'm not so sure. I would say probably there's some pain there, but it's not being interpreted in the same way that we would interpret pain and the way that we would get upset at that pain and the person causing it. So I don't know if I can absolutely answer that question. I think I have heard that comment before, that they don't experience pain in the same way, but that's my understanding of the difference, is that they wouldn't really have that sort of same reaction to it. And they'd be able to tolerate it because they have the perfection of this patience that tolerates harm. The 3rd outline is simply called abandoning harm. And it has 2 outlines within it. The reason why it is unsuitable to harm them, beings who are, the object of the Buddha's compassion, who are harming us. And then the next one, if one harms them, then there is no way to please the Buddhas. Verse 122 says, because of their happiness, the happiness of these beings, the Munis will be pleased. Muni is a shorthand for a Buddha. Shakya Muni, it means the able one of the Shakya clan. Muni means capable, or the able one. So that means that they're completely capable of doing whatever needs to be done. That they no longer have any obstacles to their ability, in a sense. So because of their happiness, the happiness of these beings, because we're not harming them, the Munis will be pleased, the Buddhas will be pleased. But if those beings are harmed, then the Buddhas will be displeased. By making them happy, sentient beings happy, I shall delight the Munis, and by harming them, I shall harm the Munis. And I always have a hard time when we get into these verses or any teaching where you talk about like displeasing the Buddhas, because what does that mean? I mean, a Buddha is a being who has completely perfected their minds. They don't have any conceptual framework for anything. They are imbued with perfect compassion for all beings all the time. Their compassion never wanes, or their love never wanes for any being. But what we're talking about here is karmically, what happens is when you do actions that are in opposition to the Buddhas, by harming other sentient beings, going against the Guru's advice, whatever the case might be, you do all these things that are negative. In a sense, this idea of displeasing them means that you are karmically setting up obstacles to receiving their benefit. The analogy that's used for the Buddhas, and I may have mentioned this in this class before, but it's like Maitreya Buddha says, it's like the sun shining in the sky. The sun doesn't decide, oh, I'm going to shine on Florida today and I'm going to shine on New York, but I'm not going to shine on New Mexico. The sun doesn't decide that, right? It's up to the individual beings that are in those areas who created the causes and conditions for their own, weather that day, as to whether it's cloud cover or whether, whatever. And even sentient beings, if the sun is out, they might not be out in the sun. They might be inside, like I am right now and you all are right now. So, it's again, up to individual conditions as to whether you experience the sun's rays. The sun's rays aren't discriminating in any way. They shine equally everywhere. In the same way, the Buddha's compassion and enlightened activities embrace all beings. There's no discrimination of, oh, I'm going to send enlightened activities to Don, but I'm not going to send them to, someone else. No, this is the Buddha's trying to do this from their side, just like the sun is always shining. It's spontaneous. It's not thought out. It's not like the Buddha wakes up and puts together a to-do list of all the beings that need to be benefited that day and the beings you're going to ignore because you'll get to them later on. It's individually determined in terms of the person who is going to benefit from the Buddha will either benefit from them because they're in the right position karmically, or they're not going to benefit from them because they've turned away from that. They're under a rock in a sense, and they can't experience the sun's rays. So this is our own karma. This is why at the end of these teachings, we always make prayers for the good health and long lives of our teachers. If our teachers are Buddhas, which again is an idea entertained in this tradition, especially by those who have tantric connections with these teachers, well, then there's nothing stopping them from being here. They want to be here. They want to be in a form that they can benefit us. They want to continue to have a long life and continue to be around. We make prayers because we need the karma to have them have a long life and be around and to have good health and so on. So it's all karmically determined. So this is the idea when we say displeasing the Buddhas or pleasing the Buddhas, it just means whether you are karmically in line with what the Buddhas want for you or you're not. And you're creating that. It's not from the side of the Buddhas. It's not like the Buddha's pissed off at you and is not going to help you today. The Buddha will have compassion for you regardless of what you do. Doesn't mean you should do all those things, whatever you want to do. It means you should try to abide by what the Buddha's advice is for you, not because the Buddha is some sort of, powerful figure that holds his fate in your hands. It's rather that you want to abide by the Buddha's advice because you want to join the ranks of the Buddha. You want to be like the Buddha. The Buddha is just giving you the advice from the vantage point of having attained that state and how you then can accomplish the same feat. So I think it is important we have that perspective in terms of this verse and not think that we're kind of creating any sort of mental distress in the Buddhas. And when we have gurus, our gurus may show that. You may have been told to do something by your guru and you have to go up and with your tail between your legs and go, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to do this. And, and your guru might give you a stern look like, what do you mean you didn't do this? And you're like, oh, I'm sorry. But, if that's a Buddha, the Buddha isn't losing their compassion for you. The Buddhas always have compassion. So here, Gyaltsab Je says, the conquerors are happy when sentient beings are happy. And they are unhappy when one harms them. It is therefore the best offering to all the able ones to make these sentient beings happy by benefiting them. This makes the conquerors happy, and harming those sentient beings becomes harming the conquerors. So it's again, just karmically, you're going against the grain of what the Buddhas want. It's not like you're, again, having any sort of personal impact on the Buddhas. It's an impact on your own karma. The next outline, if one harms them, then there is no way to please the Buddhas. If you harm sentient beings, then you've put yourself in a karmic position where you won't benefit from the Buddhas. Just as anything desirable would give my mind no pleasure if my body was ablaze with fire. Likewise, when sentient beings are harmed, there is no way for the great compassionate ones to be pleased. So once more, this makes it sound like it's in their court, like they're the ones who are they're upset that you've harmed all these beings. So it's comparable to them not being happy when you're doing this. So they wouldn't, just like they wouldn't be happy if their body was on fire and somebody was trying to give them something pleasant. It's a very strange analogy in some ways, but it is, evokes what they're talking about, I suppose. But this is not, again, the way I understand it and the way that I've been taught it is that the Buddhas aren't really kind of walking away from you and going off, out of their own sort of disappointment with what you've done. It's karmically you are putting yourself at a distance from the Buddhas, where you won't receive their benefit if you are harming beings, because they're the objects of the Buddha's compassion and love. It would be like harming the child of someone. If you really wanted to benefit from some people and you ended up harming their child, well then why would they look favorably upon you? You've created a karma that puts you in a negative light. So again, they might still care about you and have some compassion for you, but because of your action, you've distanced yourself. So at the top of page 47, Gyaltsab says, for that reason, just as one will never be mentally happy, despite all sense objects such as food and so forth, if one's body is completely in flames. I don't want to try that, don't try that at home. There is no way to please the greatly compassionate ones if one harms sentient beings. So again, you've put yourself outside of the sphere of their good influence. They still care about you. They still want you to be enlightened and have absolute perfect compassion for you. But you have created an obstacle to benefiting from them by virtue of that. The next outline within these three is to confess the disrespectful actions one engaged in earlier. So this is kind of throwing in a little verse of confession, because as we're talking about this, we might start bringing to mind, oh my gosh, I have harmed a lot of beings and maybe I should purify that. We're not going to go into the whole process of purification that we looked at in chapter 2 when we went through the verse on confession. The chapter on confession. Here, Shantideva says, due to having harmed migrating beings, I have displeased those great compassionate ones. Therefore, today, I confess individually all my negativities. I request your forgiveness, Munis, for this displeasure I have caused. And again, this too evokes more of the idea that I grew up with in Roman Catholicism, which is kind of like when you went to confession, you were seeking the, forgiveness in a sense, or the wiping away of your sins from the priest. It's a similar type of sentiment that seems to be in this verse, but that's really not what's going on. Again, from the side of the Buddhas, you're not harming them directly by harming other sentient beings, but you are harming yourself and putting yourself outside of their sphere of influence. So you are confessing so that you can get back into that sphere of influence, so that you can be back in the direct company of the Buddhas and be able to benefit from their guidance. And again, from their side, there's no change. They want to help you either way. But you've set up the karma to not be helped. So now you have to clear up the karma to be helped again. And that's how we do that, is through purification. So on page 47, he says, since harming sentient beings causes displeasure to the Buddhas, I will confess the negativities that brought displeasure to the greatly compassionate ones because of the harmed migrators, those beings that we have harmed through our actions. From today on, I will confess them individually and not conceal them, and I request them to be patient with any harm to sentient beings that causes displeasure. And again, from the side of the Buddhists, they've got perfect patience. This is just once more your own making of beseeching that may you still, look out for me even when I do go astray, even if I do have periods where I'm not as attentive and can't practice patience as well as I would like to. So it's just, again, from your side, you need to keep that energy going to benefit from these beings, from the Buddhas. And you do it by taking care of sentient beings. I mean, it makes sense in terms of that's what matters to the Buddhas, as we saw in the earlier verse. So let's go to the third outline, the final outline in this section, refraining from future disrespectful actions. So again, normally when we do our confession, we also make a determination to not do that to the best of our ability, the negative things that we've confessed. From now on, in order to delight the Tathagatas, I shall be subdued and be a servant to the world. Although many beings may kick and smash my head or kill me, I shall not retaliate, and may I delight the protectors of the world. This kind of idea of being abused, we saw that back in chapter 3, those verses that are actually a part of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's daily practice that he's made for all of us to engage in. It's called How to Transform a Suffering Life into Happiness. There's some verses from chapter 3 where he's saying, when others abuse me and beat me, may it only be a benefit to them. May they attain enlightenment through all these negative things that they do to me. So the idea here too is that regardless of what harm other beings do to you, may you not retaliate and be a servant to those beings in order to delight the Buddhas, in order to continue to be in their good graces. So on 47 in the middle of the page, he says, in order to make the Tathagatas happy, from today I will be absolutely subdued and harm nobody and become and accept myself as the servant of the world. You know, maybe this is a good little prayer that we say at the end of our confession. Whenever we do that, you know, most people do that at the end of their day with Vajrasattva practice or what have you. It'd be a nice verse to kind of put out there, because it reminds us then that this is how we have to practice during the day. And maybe we don't have contact with so many beings that we aren't getting as angry these days in terms of direct contact, but there are still a lot of things to get angry about in the world, right? A lot of people that can get us angry. I won't say who, but he continues on and he says, subdue here refers to accepting oneself as servant of the world with stable enthusiasm, kind of letting, you know, subduing our own ego and desire to defend ourselves. We're going to be a servant of the world. We're going to be at peace with all beings. Though many beings smash my head by kicking it or even kill me, I shall not retaliate, but bear it, and in such a way act to please the minds of the protectors of the world. Again, this doesn't mean that if a being is coming after you with some, you know, weapon and going to kill you, that you just succumb to them. You know, run away if you can, hide if you can, do what you can to get away from it, but don't have the mind of anger there. You know, that's not going to be beneficial, because even if that being does kill you, you're going to die with a mind of anger. Not a very good mind to die with, they say, because that will cause negative karma to ripen. That will have a great impact on our future rebirth and all the various things that happen subsequent to our death. We go back to the outlines now, and we have kind of go back up after having gone down into these outlines. We're now back up with the outline that's showing subsequently as a summary that one also needs to be respectful to sentient beings. So this is kind of a bit of a summary verse of everything we've talked about. There is no doubt that those with the nature of compassion, the Buddhas, regard all these migrating beings as themselves. This is this idea of equalizing and exchanging self and others. You know, this is a technique, one of the techniques for generating bodhicitta. I went through that in the very first course last October, chapters 1 through 3. We're going to get more on it though. In chapter 8 is where the technique for equalizing and exchanging self and others is taught by Shantideva. It's actually the chapter on meditation, but there's a whole section of it that deals with generating bodhicitta, because that's one of our main objects of meditation, obviously. So this is the idea, is the Buddhas have seen those beings as themselves. So these very ones seen in the entities of sentient beings are the protectors themselves. Why then do I not respect them? You know, if the Buddhas have generated the mind to the ability where they hold others as themselves, as if it was themselves. This is the whole point of these meditations on equalizing and exchanging self and others, is that we think we're here and way up here is most important, and all beings are down here as kind of our servants, you know. So the Buddhas have done this exchange. They have put others first, and they've relegated themselves, subdued themselves so much so that they are just a servant of the world. Of course, they've obtained their greatest welfare through becoming enlightened, but that's their mindset, is to be of complete benefit to others. They are holding others as if it was themselves. So they're the other beings are the absolute object of all of their thoughts that were culminated in their development of bodhicitta and carried on through the bodhisattva path and then manifested in their Buddhahood. So this is how Buddhas are sort of, you know, thinking, well, not thinking again, but acting in the world, is holding all those beings as if they were themselves. So here, Gyaltsab Je says, bottom of 47, there is no doubt that all these migrators are regarded by the Buddhas that possess compassion as self by way of meditating on equalizing and exchanging self and others through the bodhisattva path. So they've developed that mind that holds others as themselves, so they want to benefit those beings in the same way that they would normally want to benefit themselves in the deluded state of mind of self-cherishing that we all start with. You know, we're exchanging that. We're holding those other beings as most dear. Hence, those seen in the identity of sentient beings are in the very nature of the protector. There's no difference then in helping a sentient being and helping a Buddha in that regard, because that sentient being is the same as the Buddha, because the Buddhas have already generated the mind that holds them to be identical to themselves, you know, the same as themselves, you know, having done that exchange. Therefore, why not be respectful? It is appropriate to have faith and be respectful. So again, we'll be getting into that whole technique in Chapter 8. It's a really wonderful part of that chapter. Chapter 8 will probably start in the new year. We've been talking about dates for that, so probably just after the new year, we'll begin Chapter 8. There'll be a number of classes for that because it is a bit long chapter. I think it's the longest chapter in the text. Maybe that or 9, I'm not sure. But it's a very good one to study, especially to kind of review techniques on bodhicitta and how we work with that in our daily life. So let's go on then to the sort of final outline. So you can see now we're getting towards the end. We're going way back to the beginning, towards the one of the main outlines in the text was applying to the mind the methods to establish patience. We had the whole thing of eliminating the cause for anger that was divided into a number of parts. We looked at the 3 kinds of patience. We looked at, having patience in regard to those who are helping our enemies, and all the various things came up in there. Now we're going to look at this final section, meditating on the benefits of patience. Remember, there were just a couple of lines at the very beginning, I think in verse 6, that talked about, the great fortitude of patience and the great benefits from it. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail about what these benefits are. We're going to have a verse that talks about them in brief, 127, and then a little bit more detail. And then we kind of wrap it up with a summary of the list of benefits, and that's the end of the chapter. 127 says, "It delights the Tathagatas and perfectly accomplishes my own purpose as well. It dispels the suffering of the world. Therefore, I should always practice it." So the benefits of patience right here that are being set out are kind of 3 things. The first, it delights the Buddhas, the Tathagatas. Tathagata is another term for the Buddha, like Muni or Sugata. Tathagata means the ones gone thus, meaning kind of gone to that state where they are abiding in thusness continually, in emptiness continually. So it delights the Tathagatas. This pleases the Buddhas without a doubt. This is, the way that we create the culmination of all the Buddha's wishes for us individually is by becoming a Buddha ourselves, through practicing patience and everything that leads up to that. Patience is a necessary component of our development of bodhicitta and our development along the path. Therefore, it's delighting the Tathagatas that we're moving in that direction. Secondly, it perfectly accomplishes your own purpose as well, because as you develop the 6 perfections, including patience, you develop yourself, your own mind, your own continuum to the point of Buddhahood. Thirdly, it dispels the suffering of the world because you're not harming beings in the time, the temporal way, but moreover, you're becoming a cause to never harm beings, to always be benefiting them. Therefore, I should always practice it. So here, Gyaltsab Je says, first, to be patient and respectful when harmed by sentient beings, this alone is the supreme method for pleasing the Buddhas. Secondly, to work for the welfare of others, this alone is the supreme method to complete the accumulations in one's own continuum through practicing the perfections and so on. This is the idea when we talk about bodhicitta, that we need to develop ourselves so that we can benefit others. Well, this is that second line, is that we're developing ourselves. This is how you complete your own welfare, is by practicing the perfections and developing your own mind to that degree, removing all of the obstacles in the mind, all the detrimental mind states. And then third, this alone also clears the suffering of all sentient beings. This is how we accomplish the welfare of others. Because once more, that's what bodhicitta is all about, accomplishing the welfare of others through developing ourselves completely. And that first point is just that this is the best gift we can give to the Buddhas. This is the best way to be in line with what the Buddhas want for us. That's why generating bodhicitta is so important. But then, of course, engaging in the bodhisattva practices after that is how we move in that direction. Remember how we saw way back in the beginning that there were 2 types of bodhicitta. There's the aspirational, where we generate the wish to go there, and then there's the actual engaging bodhicitta that gets us to that destination, comparable to wanting to go somewhere and then actually going there. This is the analogy that we're looking at. So again, how do we get there? How do we get to enlightenment? By practicing patience and all of the other virtues that the Buddha set out. And how do we help other sentient beings? The same way, essentially. Because as you develop yourself, you become greater capable at benefiting others. So it says, therefore, since it perfects the 2 purposes, the purpose of self and others, I shall continually meditate continuously meditate on the 3 types of patience. Remember the 3 types once more. The first type, the patience that we looked at first, was the patience that can bear bear suffering, because we have lots of suffering in our lives, right? The suffering of aging, the suffering of not getting what we want, and we need to have tools to work with that. And one of them, of course, was recognizing how beneficial it is to recognize one's own suffering. We develop renunciation and so on. So that's the first one. The second one we looked at was the patience that is sort of definitely forbearing with the Dharma, which means that we have to use Dharma teachings in particular as an application at the time of practicing patience, especially the whole factor of causality. Remember, we looked at that things are arising from causes and conditions, that nothing is autonomous in this whole process. And that's already understanding a bit of the emptiness of it, which we won't get to till chapter 9, but nonetheless, it begins introducing that idea, which is one of the main things we need that type of patience with regard to, is the teachings of emptiness that we need to continually be dedicated to eventually be able to apply them when we're facing moments where we would get angry or whatever it is we're facing. The third level of patience is what we just concluded some time ago, but we could see a lot of what we looked at as an extension of that, was the patience that is forbearing harm from others. So the first one was about suffering in general, all the various things that happen that are just part of being a living being in this world. The third one is when we are actually experiencing harm from other beings. So we see that most of the advice that we looked at, even after that formal section on that third type of patience, was still directed in that vein of kind of other beings being the object of potentially of our anger, and therefore needing to practice patience in regard to that. Even that last bit that we looked at, right, was talking about not harming those beings, because you're going to put more distance between yourself and the Buddhas. You're harming the very beings that those Buddhas are concerned about. So again, this is 3 types of patience that we need to practice. And I'm just decided to go through them now rather than at the end of tonight, just to make sure I do a sort of summary of those 3 in particular. Then we have the next outline, explaining the benefits with an example. This is divided into 2. There's an example and meaning from the point of view of benefit. So that is divided into 2, example and meaning. Kind of makes sense. For the example, it says, for example, should even some of the king's men cause harm to many people, far-sighted men would not retaliate, even if they were able to, for they are not alone. The might of the king is their might. There's a lot of theirs and theys in this. So this is the idea that if the king's men, somebody who was kind of involved in with a very powerful person, harmed you, caused harm to you or other people, if you really were looking at further down the road what might be the effects of that, you wouldn't harm that person who's associated with the king, because the king has great forces together with being the king. And so you're putting yourself in a disadvantage, because any harm you do to that one person is going to take on a retaliation towards you that is much more powerful, because the might of the king is their might. So let's look at what Gyaltsep says in regard to this. He says, for example, though a few people belonging to the entourage of the king harm many others, the far-sighted people that look at the long-term benefits and harm will not retaliate, even if they can. Even though you could get back, you wouldn't, because you know that there's greater harm down the road. That they cannot retaliate is not alone just because of the entourage's power, but due to the power of the king. So it's, again, even if you thought you could defeat that person who was the emissary, the minister of the king, you wouldn't do it, because once you harm that person, you have the whole king's forces against you. So this is an analogy. This is an example. Well, what's an example of? It's an example of the 2 factors that are involved in our harming other beings. That we have the power of the king in terms of the karma that comes down on us for having done that, and even the sort of distancing from the Buddha that we were talking about, the displeasing of the Buddhas, that will cause us to be further away from those great compassionate ones. These are who are the entourage of the king, the people who are, or the powers of the king, the armies of the king. So let's look at the meaning, and then I think there's something in the chat box I should probably look at. It says here, verse 129, and then the first 2 of 130, first 2 lines. Likewise, I should not underestimate weak harmers, for the guardians of hell and the compassionate ones are their army. So it's talking about guardians of hell, meaning like, those beings who will be part of the karma of being in hell is that these guardians are forcing you to go through various types of torture and be, cause all kind of pain. But, they're not real sentient beings. They are creations of our own karma, but they will be the product of our most horrible actions we would do towards other beings, harming them, because we can't be patient in the face of their harm towards us. And furthermore, the compassionate ones, once more, we will displease them and they will be outside of our sphere of influence. Or theirs will be outside their sphere of influence, better way to put it. So here at the bottom of page 49, the meaning is described as this way. Likewise, as in the example, one should not dismiss any humble harmer, because they have as their support the ripening fruit of the hell guardians, are being reborn in a hell realm and having to face that torture and pain, and the displeasure of the compassionate conquerors and their children. I noticed in this translation, Venerable Feder has the Wardens of Hell. So we have the janitors of hell and another one in the Wardens of Hell. I don't know, I still like guardians. Guardians has a bit more of the connotation of what these beings are doing. They're the guards. They're what do they call them? The COs, the correctional officers. When I go to the prison, they always are talking about the COs and complaining about the COs. But anyway, they are the ones that keep you in line, that cause you to do things. But they aren't, again, real sentient beings in these hell realms. They're the creation of the karma of the beings in those realms that manifest in this form of those people who force you to keep being tortured and, having to experience all this pain from your own past actions. So that's kind of who's in the army of the beings that we are harming, is all of our own bad karma. That's going to cause us to experience future suffering in the hell realms or other realms of existence, and the karma that's going to keep us further away from the compassionate ones, not allow us to actually benefit from their presence. So Andrea said, can someone type the types of patients? Sorry, Andrea. Yeah, it might be good to go back to the slides too. I think actually it was around the second or third class that I went through those 3 types of patients. And for each of them, when I went through them individually throughout the slides, I did go into it, but it's all in the handout too. I just remembered. If you go to the handout that was for this class, Extinguishing the Flames of Anger, Course 3 handout is the file. They're all described in there as well. So rather than going through them all again, I'm going to direct you there. Thanks, Andrea. All right, let's go back to the verses. We got another outline here coming up. The other one, again, we just went through example and meaning. We now have explaining it to be superior to the example. So what we just talked about is an example. The actual effects of what we are talking about in terms of our practicing patience or not are so much greater. Let's look at the verse in here. There's like the rest of verse 130 and all of verse 131 and even 132. First, we'll look at this first part that has to do with, again, if we don't engage in good actions, what will be the effects? So here it says, just as subjects behave towards a fierce king, I should please sentient beings. That's a conclusion we should come to, is that if this king is a threatening king and there, even if there's ministers do something harmful to you, you have respect and back off because you don't want to face the ire of the king in terms of their army and what have you. So this verse 131 says, even if such a king were to become angry, though, could he cause the harm of hell, which is what I would have to experience by displeasing sentient beings? So it's kind of pointing out that although this mundane example kind of works to some degree, ordinary sentient beings on their own can't put you into hell. What puts you into hell is your own inability to practice patience in the face of their harming you. Sentient beings don't have the capacity to put you into hell or to in any lower state. Sentient beings are just doing what they're doing. It's your own reaction or response, whether it's an unfavorable reaction or a more favorable response, that determine what karma is created from that. So then on the other side, and even if such a king were to be pleased, if, our not retaliating kind of gave them some admiration of us and they would be happy that we didn't do something to go against them, well, that king could not possibly grant you Buddhahood, which is what you would obtain by pleasing sentient beings. So again, by pleasing sentient beings, we benefit, we gain Buddhahood. By harming other sentient beings, we suffer. Now again, obviously they suffer too, and that was the whole gist of this that we saw earlier, was that we don't want those sentient beings to suffer because the Buddhas don't want those beings to suffer. But wake up, this is again once more why His Holiness always goes back to this idea of being wisely selfish. If you really do care about your own suffering and happiness, you want to avoid suffering at all costs, because this is how we live our lives, right? As soon as we see something threatening to it, as soon as we start having a headache, we just get bent out of shape and we want to find a solution to all of this type of suffering. That's our way of operating, right? Is to continually look to diminish and eliminate our suffering. We're also continually looking for happiness, always trying to find something that brings some pleasure, some well-being. Well, if that's our motive, be wisely selfish. Take care of yourself by avoiding the causes of suffering, by engaging in what will lead to happiness. I mean, it's simple concept, but God, how many times do I and everyone else need to hear it, before it kind of gets into us, it sinks in and actually becomes our way of living our lives. So in terms of these verses we just looked at, Gyaltsab Je says on page 50, because of this, one should please sentient beings, like the people fearing the wrath of the king. Even if one gets angry at someone like a king, though, do they give the harm of the lower realms, which one will experience as a result of making sentient beings unhappy? They cannot. Sentient beings don't do this to you. Sentient beings don't send you to the hell realms. You send yourself to the hell realms because you haven't acted patiently in response to their harm. Even if one pleases someone like a king, though, that which will attain by pleasing sentient beings, the very enlightenment, they cannot offer that. That's not a benefit from, benefiting that sentient being in terms of what they would give you or do for you. You're doing that for yourself in a sense. Yes, there is support for that, and you need them for that. We looked at that earlier as well, right? That we need those sentient beings in our lives as a support for our practice of patience. But they're not placing you in enlightenment in a sense. You're reaching enlightenment through your own practice of patience, pleasing those beings, not harming those beings, having compassion towards those beings. So this is, again, the gist of all of this. So, okay, let me go back to the slides and continue the outlines. We only got a few more left here. We have finally a summary of the list of benefits. So these are the last two verses of chapter 6. We're going to have kind of three different types of results that are the benefits of practicing patience. The very first one is what we call here the main result, but we could call it the final result, right? This is about enlightenment. And there's two lines for that in verse 133. Then we're going to have the seen result, which is essentially the results in this life. What will happen if you practice patience in this life in terms of what you may gain from that in this very life? The benefits aren't, way out in the future when you achieve enlightenment necessarily. They can be experienced right now. Then we have the ripened result in terms of what we do in this life in practicing patience. How will that manifest in our next life and lifetimes beyond that? And eventually, of course, everything becomes part of the main result, the result of Buddhahood. But nonetheless, we can have happiness before then. It's not like you forego your happiness until you get to Buddhahood. We will have benefit from practicing patience right now. So the main results, let alone my future attainment of Buddhahood, which comes from pleasing sentient beings, and it kind of continues in the next one. So the idea is that that's the main result, as was said by Venerable Fetter's translation, look at the future Buddha that is attained as a result of pleasing sentient beings. That's, of course, a given, that if we practice patience and we work on perfecting that mind and the other perfections, you're going to attain that state, In fact, one teacher said once to me that other students as well, that you'll be forced into Buddhahood. When all the causes and conditions are complete, whether you want to be a Buddha or not, you'll become a Buddha. Of course, we want to be a Buddha. That's how you get to be a Buddha. But it was just the idea that, you will be propelled into Buddhahood if you create the causes and conditions. Just like if you start lighting tinder with a match, the flames will rise up. It's just inevitable. It's causes and results. The whole path is causes and results. Then this results, it's described on page 50 by Gyaltsab Je. He says, look at how it is appropriate to please sentient beings and be patient with them by contemplating the benefit of enlightenment that arises as a result of pleasing sentient beings. This is also saying that it is suitable to meditate on patience in relation to the results ripening in this and the later life. Because it's, again, kind of the way that it was worded in our translation. It's saying, yeah, and there are other benefits too, but look at the main benefit. Look at what you'll end up with if you continue practicing patience and all these other practices. You're going to get enlightened, baby, as Venerable Rabina might say. This next little paragraph, I had a real hard time. And again, I don't have any commentaries on this commentary. So this first part where it says, although the meaning is clear, an earlier proponent says, since it is difficult to cognize a Buddha, it is unsuitable to interpret the meaning of for the moment as leave it. And I couldn't find where the reference even to for the moment is. So I'm not even sure what that's referring to. But the rest of this is kind of worth talking about. It says, although the phenomena of this life are easy to cognize, the extremely hidden future results are harder to cognize than a Buddha. A Buddha can be cognized by depending on reason without depending on quotations, but that the very hidden meaning can only be cognized subsequently to this accords with the view of all great pioneers. The idea being that we can infer what a Buddha is like when we're talking about, may I become a Buddha and have this particular result. But when it comes to future results of our actions in this life and future lives, that's hidden phenomena. In fact, it's said to be extremely hidden phenomena. There are three types of phenomena, the Buddha says. The first is our manifest phenomena. This is stuff that, colors and shapes and objects and things, sounds, everything in the world that is manifest to us is in that category. No surprise there. It's directly knowable. We can know that through direct, immediate experience. The second level of phenomena is those things which are hidden, but only slightly hidden. Believe it or not, emptiness falls into that category. It's something that we can know through inference, through actually logically reasoning, we can get to it. So we can actually understand some of these things that are hidden from us right now through reasoning and through using our minds and using the teachings of the Buddha. But it's a process we can go through ourselves, through our own intellectual pursuit. The third, though, we have to depend upon others' scriptural resources for that, scriptural sources that will direct us to understand those. And that's the extremely hidden phenomena. And in that category, the main thing that's always talked about is the subtle workings of karma. Because karma is not, something that is black and white. It's a dynamic process. We've talked about it a number of times already in this course, and no doubt you've all had teachings on it, but it makes it sound very linear and very direct, but it's actually dynamic and influenced by so many other factors, because it's not, just that you have to have the cause to get the result, but then there's all the other conditions that come into play, and there's all the other things that influence when things ripen and so on. So to actually know the next two that we're going to look at, the seen results in this life or even the results in a future life, we can't actually know those. We have to depend upon the general teachings that the Buddha gave and what Shantideva is giving us here in terms of his comments about what we will obtain if we practice patience in this life. But Buddhahood, we can kind of have an understanding that, yeah, based on how it's all laid out in the traditional texts, how we engage in the paths and grounds and proceed on our path, we will attain this state, and we can kind of know what that state is like through concepts. Obviously, we don't know what Buddhahood is like in a direct way, but we can infer all of that. So that's I just wanted to explain that meaning of that, though again, that first part is a bit of a puzzle to me in terms of what he was actually referring to with this idea for the moment. So let's go on to the next part, the seen result, which again is a result in this life or results in this life. Why do I not see that there will be great glory, fame, and happiness in this very life? So regardless of the result of Buddhahood, why am I blind to the fact that there won't be great benefit even in this life? Great glory, fame, happiness. So let's look at what Gyaltsab says about this at the bottom of page 50. He says, also in this life, there are seen results that arise from patience, such as glory of increased perfections, our own qualities becoming greater. We could become more glorious in a sense. Being well regarded by others, right? I mean, if we practice patience with others, we don't get sort of that bad rep. We don't have people who think poorly of us because they see us being patient in the face of others harming us, and they admire those qualities. We have happiness, really. I mean, we're living at peace with other beings. That's why, once more, when we did that verse last week, we talked about how it becomes very rare at times for us to actually have angry people in our lives if we keep practicing patience in this way. And even in this lifetime, right? If those people come into your life and they're all red-faced and you manage to be patient in the face of that, very frequently it causes them to calm down. So there are some people who get more irritated at that, don't get me wrong, but usually our being patient, it calms things. It doesn't cause things to continue to be agitated. And so in that way, we start experiencing happiness. We start experiencing more contentment in our daily life because we're not going around carrying that hot coal. Like they say, the mind of anger and resentment is like carrying a hot coal waiting to throw it at the person that offended you. Well, who's getting burned? We end up getting all the pain from that. So you'll be happier if you're not walking around, stuffing all this anger inside you, carrying it around, waiting to, erupt at, a situation that triggers it. So again, why does one not see this? Therefore, one should strive in making sentient beings happy. We should be seeing that the immediate effects of being patient are right here to experience. Won't be, maybe that instant. Immediate means in this lifetime. It doesn't mean that instantly we'll have it. Initially, it does take some, fortitude to practice in this way. It really does, involve a great strength of mind, and it can be really hard to be patient. There's going to be some advice that we get at the end here from a few teachers that will help us to feel some comfort in the face of that. But anyway, this is an important part of it, is to recognize that we can have benefits in this very life from our practice of patience. The ripened result, what do we get in future lives? Here, Master Shantideva concludes this chapter by saying, while in cyclic existence, patience causes beauty, freedom from sickness, and fame. Because of these, I shall live for a very long time and win the prosperous pleasures of the wheel-turning kings. So even mundane results in future lives will be there from our practice of patience. They say one of the main causes is to give you a beautiful appearance, to be handsome, to be beautiful, to have, a way that is very appealing to others in your appearance. It'll also give you freedom from sickness, because if you're not harming others, you're not creating the karma to be sick and have your own body, diminished in strength and vitality. You also will be, experiencing some fame in the future, because that ripens into people thinking well of you, people, having a greater standing in the world, where you can then have greater influence on others. You'll live for a very long time because you won't have created the causes to shorten your life, because once more, you haven't harmed others through killing them and so on. And you'll even win these pleasures of what are called the wheel-turning kings, these great beings that appear at various times in the world that are very beneficent rulers that actually do amazing things for the world that they live in, that they abide in. I want to do one little thing from Pema Chodron. I like what she said about this. She said, Shantideva makes one last pitch for why you should practice patience. I've been talking about the benefits of that. So he goes, if unshakable, indestructible Buddhahood isn't enough of a carrot, how's this? If we practice as he suggests, we will look good, feel good, and be famous. So again, get lots of carrots from this, lots of benefits, that we can see that are in our future if we actually practice patience. It's kind of nice that that comes at the end. We went through sort of the heavy stuff at the very beginning, all the merit that's going to get burned up and consumed, especially if we get angry at a high-level bodhisattva. And now at the very end, we get sort of the nice stuff. This is actually going to be in your greatest interest to practice patience. Not to say, again, all the sentient beings that won't be harmed because you're not yelling at them and throwing things at them and whatever. But, I really feel like it's nice to end the chapter this way. So on page 51, the last page of Gyaltsab Je's commentary, he says, also, while circling, one attains a beautiful form. The Samsaric Perfections, good health, and great reputation. Through that, one will have a long life. One will also have the extensive and vast happiness of a wheel-turning king. In short, having recognized opposing factors such as a proclivity for anger, intimidation from virtuous dharmas, non-wish or aspiration for virtuous dharmas, and so forth, one then relies on their antidotes. So we've been looking at patience as the antidote to anger, which is, this very powerful negative state of mind. And their antidotes, again, which are the
patience that does not think anything from harm, the patience that is not harmed by suffering and abides in its natural state, and the patience strongly abiding on the wish for the Dharma due to discriminating awareness. Those are the three, again, that I talked about earlier, so they do come in here at the end as well. So let's go back to the slides, because I did have a little bit more to share from 134 from Abbot Dr. Gyaltsen's commentary. He had a few more things there. He says, "It is just as has been said in Arya Sura's Garland of Birth Stories, the Jataka Mala. The armor of the holy beings is patience. It transcends and even destroys the bad words of negative beings, transforming them mostly into flowers of praise for excellent qualities." This idea of transforming the arrows of the negative things into flowers. "It will become that which has fame as its branches. Patience destroys the discordant classes of the Dharma. Patience causes the attainment of the bliss of complete liberation. If one makes strong effort, patience will bring benefit. Is there anyone who does not want to be patient?" So I think this is, again, good advice for us to take to heart, that there's amazing qualities that we can have and benefits we can accrue from being patient. There's a summarizing verse that is composed by Gyaltsab. Each of these are at the end of the chapter that kind of give his own thoughts on that. Gyaltsab here says, "Although one meditates on the virtue of generosity and the like for eons, they are destroyed by the fire tongue of anger. Therefore, one needs to generate the force of patience again and again, and not give anger any chance." So I have a few more slides to go through, so I'm going to try to do this a little bit quickly so we can get through things tonight, not have any leftover stuff. But nonetheless, you might go to your handout as well for this part in particular to review it, because I'm just going to go through it very quickly. I threw this in there, even though this is traditionally presented within a Lam Rim kind of text, and this is where it comes from, is Geshe Lodin's Lam Rim, contemporary Lam Rim book called Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. At the end of each perfection, I'm going to talk about how do you practice each of the six perfections with that one. So patience with each of these. So practicing the perfection of patience in conjunction with all six perfections is explained so that you can maximize your accumulation of merit, and you can kind of bring all of these into a single act. Generosity with patience while practicing patience, lead others into the practice of patience, and then give them instructions on how to practice that. That's sort of the generosity of giving dharma and giving protection from harm. It's a very powerful way to practice your patience. Ethics with patience. Be mindful not to break any of your individual liberation, bodhicitta, or vajrayana vows while engaged in the practice of patience, and be mindful not to harm others. Patience within patience. Allow the tendencies that you develop through the practice of patience to help you to practice patience continuously in the future. In other words, use it as a kind of self-perpetuating thing. As much more you practice patience, more you want to put energy into inspiring your practice of patience. And aspire to be able to continue to practice patience until attaining enlightenment. Joyous effort with patience. Again, the topic of our next chapter we'll be looking at in end of September through October. When practicing patience, do so with joy and energy, and overcome any obstacles holding you back from practicing patience. Then concentration with patience, the fifth perfection. While engaging in practicing patience, keep your mind tranquil and undistracted. Be mindful and retain complete concentration without any agitation or dullness. Difficult to do, to keep your concentration present when you're trying to do it, but you see how important it is actually to help practice patience, because if the mind is that tranquil and calm, then patience will come much more naturally. So ideally, we should have great concentration with our practice of patience. Then finally, wisdom with patience. Use your faculty of analytical wisdom to discern how to practice patience skillfully and to discriminate between right and wrong practice. That's more the conventional wisdom. But then in terms of ultimate wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness, also be aware of the cycle of three emptinesses, what is often called the three spheres of emptiness. It's an empty object of patience, like the person who is annoying you, an empty act of patience, your being patient, that action, and an empty practitioner of patience, yourself, not holding on to any of these as inherently existent. So again, you might review those on your own or go to another Lam Rim text that explains them, but it's a way to make your patience incredibly powerful. I want to throw in some bits that are advice that you may have come across in other readings that are on the book list. But this first one is from Flash of Lightning in the Dark by His Holiness, where he just going through a number of the verses in this whole text. It's a very small book, and so he doesn't cover everything. But at the tail end of his description of chapter 6, he says, this very important chapter on patience is the foundation for the 8th chapter, which we'll get into again in January, which shows how we can benefit others through understanding the qualities of altruism and the disadvantages of egotism or self-centeredness. This is again one of the main topics in chapter 8, besides how we generate calm abiding and meditative stabilization. In general, he continues, it is the very notion of enemies that is the obstacle to bodhicitta, right? Those are what are keeping us from having a mind that embraces all beings. If we can transform an enemy into someone for whom we feel respect and gratitude, then our practice will naturally progress. Like water flowing a channel cut into the earth. Following a channel cut into the earth. So water just naturally goes into that channel. In the same way, when we begin to, hold our enemy respectfully and with some gratefulness for the kindness they're showing us, giving us the opportunity to practice patience, our practice of bodhicitta will just start flowing forward. That obstacle will be removed. Now we go on to just a little bit from an oral commentary by Geshe Jumpa Tekchok that I mentioned earlier. He says, through an effective practice of the 3 kinds of patience, we should keep ourselves from going under the sway of anger and make good use of our precious life with its freedoms and endowments. This is one of the best ways to use this life, is to use it to begin to diminish our anger. Some of you may already be very patient. I congratulate you. You must have done a lot of work in prior lives. You studied Shantideva's chapter 6 in prior lives and took it to heart and practiced it. But for a lot of us, we really should be addressing that. That is one of the, as we saw, most dangerous afflictions we have. And he says, if we do not do that, although we might have been increasing our virtue through accustoming ourselves to it over many eons, one lick from the tongue of the flame of anger will destroy it all, just like a huge stack of hay being destroyed by just a tiny fire, just like these horrific fires that are going on, in our country now, especially in California. Thinking in this way, develop the force of your patience and do not give anger the least opportunity to arise. Last bit of advice from a third master, Geshe Topten, the other book that's on your book list that I think is a really good one to read in conjunction with this whole course because it covers the entire text. It doesn't have the verses in there, so you have a little bit of a challenge going through it. It does enumerate them when they're being discussed, but nonetheless, Geshe Topten at the end of his chapter says, it might be hard at first to practice patience, but the right effort will bring results. A person who teaches it might not be able to practice it himself, like me, because teaching is easy, but practicing a great deal harder. However, even just the thought of being patient is beneficial. So give ourselves kudos for any thoughts of being patient that we've had over these, 7, 8 weeks, however long it took us, 9 weeks. I don't remember how many weeks it was. I think it was 9 weeks. So those are the last comments that I wanted to share with you from those great masters about practicing this skill of patience. Even just having the thought of it, if that's all that you've gotten from all of these teachings and studying this on your own, that you want to practice patience, that you see the benefits of it and you're inspired in that way, that's great. That's what will get you to actually do it. So I hope you're able to, put these teachings into practice. Are there any final comments or questions from anybody? I didn't look at the chat box. Okay. Richard kindly put a little thing from the Lamrim Chenmo by Tsongkhapa. Yeah, actually, another nice text to study in conjunction with this chapter is the great treatise by Lama Tsongkhapa. Again, it's in volume 2, which is the practices of a bodhisattva, excluding the development of calm abiding and special insight, which are in volume 3. And then there's these wonderful set of commentaries by Geshe Lundap Sopa. Geshe Sopa was Lama Zopa's teacher. Sopa and Zopa are both the same word, patience. But anyway, both, I know Lama Zopa gives us lots of opportunities to practice patience, especially when you're at a teaching that goes on into the wee hours. But nonetheless, Geshe Sopa gave an amazing set through many, many years, apparently, of commentaries on the Lamrim Chenmo, and they've been assembled into 5 books. Volume 3 is the volume on that practices of a bodhisattva. So you can find all of that there and study patience in even more detail there. But he repeats a lot of the stuff that comes from Shantideva. I mean, he really relies heavily upon Shantideva's teachings, and he just structures things a little bit differently. But it's really, really useful. I've shared a little bit of Tsongkhapa through this. Any other comments or questions? I didn't give people really a chance. I went to the chat box and saw Richard's comment. Anyone? Fernando, yes.
I have a question. When they mentioned a brief moment of anger can destroy like all the merit created, does it mean that only by getting angry or by the result of getting angry, like attacking someone else? Or is it just by getting angry that it happens?
What I've heard, Fernando, is it is the mind of anger. You know, but if we have to look at again, that situation was specifically when we were getting angry at a bodhisattva. And there are different things that happen when you're like a bodhisattva getting mad at another bodhisattva. Those are all set out in Chandrakirti's text, and I don't have really a time to go into all that, nor do I have myself prepared to talk about all of that. But we're talking about a special incident, when an instant of anger towards a highly developed being, because they're a powerful object. You know, from the side of that bodhisattva, they don't want you to suffer in that way. It's not like they're involved in that. Once more, just like we talked about tonight, those sentient beings aren't involved in creating our enlightenment or creating our hell. We're the ones creating it. So once more, the idea is that because you have a very powerful object that you're directing your anger towards, it has great ramifications in terms of the suffering we have to experience, the consuming of all of our merit. You know, and they compare this. You know, I guess we do have to, and maybe we even discussed this a little bit when we went through that at the beginning of this course, but we have to hold to this to some degree because we are also holding to the ability to destroy our negative karma through purification, right? You know, so our negative actions must be able to destroy our positive potential through the force of that. So it just kind of makes sense that there would be commensurate types of destruction that could occur. The destruction of our merit through very negative states of mind, and the destruction of our negative actions through a very positive state of mind. So I guess, you know, we get both. With karma, you always get both. You know, you can't say, well, I want karma to increase and multiply when it's good, but I don't want it to increase and multiply when it's bad. So my understanding, again, is that this is a moment of anger that is directed. And remember, an anger here is a moment of the intention to harm. It has to get to that place of kind of that heatedness. It's not just, oh, I'm irritated at what this Lama is saying. You know, I don't think that's what we would qualify as a moment of anger. So if you're hearing a teaching and the teacher's saying something, you know, maybe it was teaching on the hell realms by Lama Zopa, where he's going on for many, many hours, and you're kind of like starting to get irritated. Wouldn't say that's a moment of anger towards Lama Zopa, you know, and so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. Try to watch your mind. I think this is a wonderful thing about when Rinpoche tests us like this. It's good to watch your mind and see how much you can be patient in the face of that. But nonetheless, you know, I don't think it would be something like that. I think it would be if you actually kind of started really having angry thoughts like, oh, I wish I could just go shut him up or whatever. I mean, I'm not saying I should ever think that, but the idea is that if you get it to that place where you're actually generating a harmful kind of intent behind it, that's what I would consider here to be, again, much more qualified moment of anger. But it doesn't have to be actually harming, like you're suggesting, Fernando. You know, if you harm somebody in that way, I mean, that would be really bad. I saw one argument with like a teacher and somebody, and they were getting ready to like throw something at the teacher, and I was kind of going, I mean, please don't do that. But, you know, this is why we have to be careful now with our minds and do what we can to increase our patience, is so that if we do get tested in those moments by bodhisattvas or whoever, we may not know that again, we are able to keep the lid on it. We are able to control ourselves. So, all right. Thanks for that question. I wish I had a different answer for you, because I know we'd all like it to be a lot different. But anyone else?
I posted one quick one on the chat for you.
Oh, there's one in the chat. All right, Andrea, thank you for telling me. I didn't have the chat box open right now. In the Wisdom with Patience slide, what does he mean by discern how to practice skillfully and discriminate between right and wrong patience? Again, the idea being that we need to discriminate what's happening at the moment to know what is the appropriate response conventionally in terms of karma, what is the most karmically appropriate. Right and wrong patience. I don't know. I mean, I've never heard the term wrong patience, so I'm not really sure exactly what he means by that. Probably, again, when we may have incorrect views of what patience is. We might not be practicing it fully if we don't have correct knowledge. So again, we can talk about wisdom in terms of conventional wisdom, which means understanding the sort of general teachings of the Buddha. Everything we looked at in this chapter, other than the teachings that were about emptiness and causation at that level of understanding emptiness, are all general instructions to abide by things within the sphere of cause and effect, karma, to just understand the Buddha's general path about how he's saying we should move along this and behave and whatever. That's a conventional wisdom that we need to have in order to develop our minds. But we eventually need to have the ultimate wisdom of emptiness, and that again was the second part of that. So he's really just saying, you have to study well and know the ins and outs of it. Just like, when we looked at that part of the chapter that we started with tonight, where he was saying about getting in the way of our merit, we might have this distorted view of patience where we think, oh, well, patience is called for when somebody's really harming me. But if they're getting in the way of me being meritorious, I have every right to get mad at them and, force them out of my way. And Shantideva said, no, you need to be practicing patience, especially then, because that's the best practice at that time. So this may be what he means by, like, again, right or wrong patience, knowing when that it is always correct in a sense to practice patience in regard to anything that harms us, any suffering we experience, anything we have to bear with. Does that make some sense? Yeah. Okay, good. I want to tell you a quick little story. I know it's 6 minutes after, but I was told the story by somebody who attended a Kopan course with Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And it was one of these evenings when Rinpoche was doing the whole hell realm thing. And he was going off and off and off about, or on and on and on about the hell realms. And at the very end of the teaching, if it went into the wee hours, he gets up and he starts walking out. And there was a student. He stopped and he said something to the student. And then he went on his way out the Gompa. And my friend went up and knew this person and asked me, he said, what did Lama Zopa say to you? And the guy had this look on his face, and he said, well, it was really pretty wild. He said, throughout this whole teaching, I've been doing nothing but thinking about how I'd like to go down to Kathmandu and get a pizza. And Rinpoche just came up to me and said, there are no pizzas in the hell realm. So I love that story. I mean, it kind of shows, there's more going on there than what we sometimes think. So be careful what you think about in the presence of Rinpoche. I'm sorry, what was that comment?
If there's no pizza in the hell realms, that's a great incentive to practice patience.
Yeah, you want to go to the Pizza Pure Land where they have like all of the most wonderful pizzas. Anyway, so good. Any other comments or questions? I hope this was a good course for everyone. Again, this is really, as His Holiness loves this chapter because it's once more demonstrating to us all the ways, all the approaches to working with anger. I highly recommend, if you want to pursue a more kind of committed practice in working with this, certainly using what we've studied, but also using Thupten Chodron's book, Working with Anger. It's really quite nice in terms of just down to earth, talking about instructions, goes into a variety of ways, even beyond what Shantideva talks about to work with patients. An excellent, excellent book. So let's do our dedication prayers. And again, dedicate really strongly as we go through this tonight, all the merit that we've accumulated through these last weeks that we've been doing this. I think we started in July 6th on His Holiness's birthday. So we've had the good fortune, to make this last the full duration. We're all still here. At least I'm pretty sure everyone who started is still here. And we've had, the blessings of the gurus to be able to accomplish, this chapter. And as we dedicate, make strong intentions to continue our study. We have, again, chapter 7 coming up very soon, chapters 8, 9, and 10 in the new year. It takes a lot to kind of keep all this going karmically, meritoriously. So dedicate the merit for the continuation of your own study all the way to the development of Buddhahood, so that you then can help others to lead them to that state. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then recognizing again this preciousness of this mind of bodhicitta, make the strong wish that this grow very deeply in our own hearts and in the hearts of all beings, especially all those who are in power in our world, who are making decisions that affect many others. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all of them were guided by bodhicitta? May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then again, seeing the preciousness of our spiritual guides, we're going to make prayers for these two holy teachers. As we recite these verses, think that we're not just creating the causes for their good health and long life, but for the good health and long lives of all spiritual guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And also we dedicate that all beings will always have perfect guides in their lives. May we all have that karma to through what we've done here tonight and dedicating it in that way. Lastly, dedicate for all those beings you're holding in your hearts, whether you know them or not, but certainly those that you do know, dedicate for their welfare. If they're experiencing obstacles, that they be free of those. If they're experiencing illness, that they obtain perfect health immediately. If they have died or are dying, that they have a good rebirth and all the conducive conditions they need. And may all sentient beings that we are holding in our hearts have everything that they need to become enlightened quickly. And may all beings attain that state through the power of what we've done throughout this course and tonight. Okay, I wish you all well in your practice of patience. There will be the final sort of handouts and things coming out tomorrow, and I hope you continue to find those useful. But I'm welcoming any feedback. If people, found things weren't useful, let me know. I'm just, I'll modify as I need to. But I really appreciate, again, everyone's involvement and commitment to this course, and I'll look forward to seeing you all at the end of September. I get to go on retreat on Friday, so I'm very excited that I finally get a little bit of a break from things. So I'll be thinking of all of you, dedicating for all of you. So anyway, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don. Thank
Good.
you. Have a good